Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion is going to focus on upholding quality journalism while we're living in a digital era. You know, so today some of the things that we face in the media sector that are challenging are syndromes such as clickbait syndrome, the fake news syndrome, the breaking news syndrome. So what are the ways in which we can uphold journalistic standards at the same time move along with this digital age? And joining this conversation, which is after the recent Africa Day of Information that took place on 8th November. This is a follow-up to the conversations that were held last week. Joining us, we have guests from the New Times and Igihe. And I'll start by introducing the guest on my left, James Munyaneza. Thank you for joining us. He is the managing editor of New Times Rwanda.
Thank you for having me, Dana.
Great. We are also joined by Olga Inez Ishimwe, who is the creative director at Igihe.
Thank you for having me.
My name is Dana PC, host of The Square. I am also joined by the resident panelist on The Square. Brenna Namata is also joining us tonight. Brenna, always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Dana.
You're welcome. Unfortunately, our resident panelist, Charles Haber, could not be here. But before we kick off, we usually have midweek highlights on The Square from the resident panelists. Brenna, is there anything you'd like to share that caught your attention this week?
Yes, of course. We at Nation Media Group are very excited about our upcoming event on the 8th and 9th of December, 60th anniversary. So this week...
Nation Media.
Yes, Nation Media Group.
Nation Media has been around for 60 years.
60 years.
So like straight
and
after
we're still
independence.
Counting. We're not dying yet. 60 years.
Yes.
And so we had this big interview with His Excellency. And from that interview, there were several issues that came out. One around regional integration, the emphasis on its importance. Regional integration is a necessity. Then the Arsenal deal, clarity in terms of the returns on investment. So it's been it's a good week at Nation Media Group, and we're excited. Yes.
Good for you. I mean, definitely we will be there with you at Kusi. I think a lot of us are looking forward to Nation Media celebrating 60 years. I mean, a media house that, you know, you think most countries actually in Africa got independence around that time. So good for you.
Yes, we are really excited, and that's why Kusi is around the next 60 years in Africa. We are trying to imagine what will Africa look like.
Yes.
There are things that must be done if we are to survive, and the discussions that will be happening at Kusi are really around that, trying to imagine Africa in the next 60 years.
In the next 60 years.
Yes.
Fantastic. So James, thank you for joining us, and Olga, we're really happy to have you here. All of us on this panel are actually media practitioners, myself and Berna included. So thank you for honoring our invitation. The first topic that I want us to discuss is to do with quality journalism. And a lot of the times when people think of news in Rwanda, it's based on, you know, government and so forth and so on. And if you'll just allow me to read a couple of facts. A 2017 survey called the Media and Policymaking in Rwanda found that only 4.2% of stories published in newspapers and broadcast by radio and TV stations come from citizens. The rest, 71.2% of stories are also from government officials, mainly workshops, conferences, you know, and official meetings. So when it comes to quality journalism, which is what we're here to discuss, around 2.1% is investigative. We have 2.4% that's interpretative, 13.7% are features, and 8.1% are commentaries. So where are stories from the citizens? Where is citizen-centered journalism? Where is quality journalism instead of the bulk of it coming from meetings and conferences and so forth and so on? And James, I'd like you to lead in, you know, sharing your ideas on this.
Thank you, Diana. To reach some level where you would want to say that we are making progress. Now, there has been progress, obviously, but when you shared such statistics, it obviously shows that a lot is missing. It's also, media is also a reflection in our society. You would say that for the media to be dominated by, let's say, government sources or government-related news, maybe you can look at it a bit more broadly.
Okay. In Rwanda?
In Rwanda.
Yes.
I think for a long time, the government of Rwanda has been almost everything. It has been almost everywhere. And this is not, this has been by default. Because if you look at other areas of the economy or other segments of society, private sector, it is growing, but it's still weak, even today. Civil society, the same thing, across the board. So you find that in most cases, even in private sector, government has a role to play. Even if also civil society, there is little you can get from there sometimes. But yes, I agree also that the media can do much better. The media can go out of our way and push and try to dig deeper and try to create something out of almost nothing. But of course, don't forget that the media, we are basically reporters in most cases. So there is a challenge. But in terms of quality, we normally have every media house. I'll speak on my own behalf, also on the behalf of the media house I work for. I'll not speak for Rwanda Today or EGA. But I think that we continue to put in efforts. Quality also comes with investments.
Yes.
So there are challenges in that field, of course.
Yes.
If you cannot, let's say, if you're based in Kigali and you cannot maintain or open and maintain a bureau in Rusizi on a 24-hour basis, I mean, like a permanent bureau there, or Nyagatare, or Ruavu, then there is a problem. So chances that you're going to mostly be dominated or more, you're going to be more into stories that are, from the city, from the town, and these are stories that are mostly government related or private sector. You look at federation. I mean, we have a long way to go. I want to think that today maybe the numbers have improved, but yes, I will not be in the city and be in denial that we don't have a lot of work to do.
Before I get to you, Olga, Brenna, I know you have ranted before, ranted and raved before about the quality of our media in Rwanda. You always, say that we are not in-depth enough. We don't do, analysis of events. I mean, we're just echoing things that have already happened, And you've been in the media for several years. You're a leading figure in the media. You've been a columnist. You now manage a media house. You've been a reporter, so forth and so on. What do you think is the issue, and what are some ideas you have on how we can really advance or enhance the level of journalism in this country, and also other parts of the continent?
Thank you, Dana. I feel like most of the time when we talk about the media, and he alluded to that, is that we kind of look at it in isolation, But to be fair, the media is growing just like any other sector in the economy. And we have seen progress, constant progress over the years. I mean, I'm from the New Times. I'm a product of
I'm also a product of the New Times.
I'm proudly a product of the New Times.
Yes.
And when I joined the New Times, it was 3 times. It was being published 3 times
a week.
Yes. Today, the New Times is a daily. And at that time, we had a website, but it was not as dynamic as it is today. I mean, today, you look at New Times, they have a very vibrant website, they're on social media, dynamic content. So there's been a lot of progress. And EGA is also, EGA came in and kind of, changed things, because I think in terms of multimedia, they are still leading, even in terms of numbers. But I think the bigger challenge that we face today is actually in terms of the quality of the content.
Yes.
Because suddenly we have to deal with the digital disruption. You're fighting to break stories, and with that, of course, it takes away the focus that you would actually put. Because before, if you're 3 times a week, then you have the time to go through a story and make sure it's well researched. Now that luxury is not there anymore. So the challenge in most newsrooms is how do you cope with the 24-hour clock around the newsroom, but also deliver quality. Secondly, I feel that we are struggling with quality content, producing quality content, because the more audiences shift online, for us, as traditional media, our sources of revenue are shrinking, because not many Rwandans are willing to pay for content. And it's the same, around the world. And because they always say, if it's good content, we are willing to pay for it. And it's a yes and no. How many Rwandans are actually happy to log in their card details, if you have a paywall? So, briefly, I think we're making progress, but then I think the bigger challenge is how do you remain sustainable? If you are in New Times, you're investing a lot of money in the website, because behind the content, you have journalists with families, journalists who want to grow their careers, and the question is, how do you fund that process? Yeah.
Olga, your take on this? How can we improve the quality of journalism, and also in terms of reporting, having more in-depth analysis and so forth and so on? Because this report shows that a lot of news is generated here by conferences and workshops, so to speak.
Right. Thank you very much. So to start, I would say that in the past years, groundbreaking change has happened in the digital media. But I still think that there is room for improvement. And so to speak, I think that mainly the reasons why we are not having such quality content is because content is a bit expensive. So as my colleagues here said, you'd have to invest your efforts in both capacity building and also making sure that, for example, there is a good feature story that is maybe in Rubavu, and you are here in Kigali, so that requires investment. And moreover, I think that it requires capacity building, because it's in the people that it's the people who are going to actually write such content that we actually want to have an impact on the society. And also, I think that if for us to have in-depth analysis and to produce more quality content, I think that we should invest in people who haven't even yet started as media practitioners, because I believe that passion is key in journalism. So I'd rather say that we go into universities and go speak to those young people who want to become journalists, and try to share the reality out here, how it is. And from there, I think that we can actually get a fresher perspective on maybe how they think they can innovate and make changes or bring in trends that would affect our industry as well.
You see, what I'm picking up from all three of you is the biggest issue in quality, in reach, in growth is to do with investments. It's to do with money at the end of the day. And when you say we need to invest, who is they? How should they invest? Where should this money come from? At the Rwanda Governance Board meeting last week, some of the things that we discussed was a media fund. I don't know, maybe James and Brenna, you will shed more light, and Olga. Yes. Is there a media fund in Rwanda that we have? There are funds that different professions have that the professions utilize to, advance some of their key practitioners. I don't know if there's a media fund in Rwanda. So I want to just, your ideas on funding and financing. The second is there are also schools of thought that think government should subsidize or should provide subsidies to, Berna, you're shaking your head, to media houses or tax breaks or something, I don't know. But to make the quality that we so seek in this particular sector become a reality. So I'll start with you, Berna, because you seem to have some clear thoughts, agreements and disagreements. Where should this financing come from?
To be very honest with you, it's one of those questions that keeps me awake. Yes. Because part of my KPIs is revenue growth, and I have targets. So every month, my supervisor is looking at the graph and asking me, where are the numbers? Where is the revenue? And looking at the models that are being proposed right now, in my view, I think they're just being unrealistic. To imagine that a media fund by government would lead to sustainability in the media, in my view, I don't think so. They can let me know where it has worked, but I don't think so. The other thing we need to be mindful about is that the media, in a way, is a reflection of the economy. So if I'm private, I'm expecting to get support, not just from government, but also from private. Now, the challenge we face today is that you just have a few corporates who, in a way, kind of muzzle the press. They will come to you, and because they know your choices are limited, they'll just tell you, this is what we'll give you, and that's it. You can't even have a discussion, and that's a problem. So, what's the solution? In my view, I feel that there are opportunities that we haven't tapped. For instance, with MICE. As a country, we've been promoting MICE, meetings, conferences, events, but you still find that, unfortunately, from government agencies, they're pushing media to cover events for free. The media
Wait,
element,
very quickly. So
yes.
You think government agencies should pay for media coverage?
I think the media coverage in relation to PR should be paid for.
Yes.
Because if you're calling journalists to cover a PR event, there's a budget for that.
Yes.
So, but in most cases, you find that if the convener of the meeting has an arrangement with RDB or RSCB, there's no communication budget that will end up benefiting local media.
During my time, back long time ago at TV Rwanda, as a reporter, we'd be called to cover, as a journalist, we'd be called to cover government events. And government was not supposed to pay us. If anything, it was a conflict of interest if government is paying journalists come and cover the events. So I want to know, and I think it's still the same, Let me clarify. If it's a private event, but still media houses, when there's money involved, there's still an issue. So you're saying that...
Let me clarify. Yes. If you're selling a package in terms of conference tourism, the media should be part of that package.
I get what you're saying.
To say that we have EJ, we have New Times that can actually cover your event live, and here are their costs, And
that applies to government? Is that what you're insinuating?
It doesn't have to be government. Yes. It's just that if you're bidding for an international conference, let's have a media component to that, at least to showcase that, because you'd be very surprised. There are people who come here and they don't think we have strong media that can actually cover events. But what they expect you to do is to cover the event just because there's a public official. And for us, from interactions with some of my colleagues in the private sector, we feel that, one, no one should pay for coverage. So if your event is newsworthy, we'll definitely cover it.
I get you.
Yeah?
Yes.
That's one. So we do not expect that you'll send out press releases and follow up with a phone call and say, have you seen my press release? Why is it not on your website? Or why don't you have journalists covering this event? If it's newsworthy, we expect that you will let us do the work. So, going back
if
to
not, there's a monetary aspect to it.
Yes, there's a monetary aspect
And this
to
is
that
one way of
because
financing.
Yes,
the
and that
houses,
becomes
yeah.
public relations.
Yes.
You know, we will come, give you the pictures that you need, reproduce. There's a page for that, you know, on websites. So when we are thinking about financing, I feel that a media fund is not sustainable. Instead, we need to create channels where the media can also compete. But it becomes difficult if you have limited channels, especially when we look at MICE and you have these key government agencies with their own platforms, doing comms, and then they still expect to use the media to push out some of this communication. The second issue about the government subsidy, I think the only media
Basically, anything from government for you is not sustainable.
No, the only media that should qualify for a government subsidy is public. Yes. And their mission is clear. It's public interest. And once they qualify for that kind of subsidy, then we have the right to ask them, what are you covering? Because sometimes I think the debate is we tend to have a lot of focus on government events with our public media. And we're saying, no, beyond that, they are ordinary citizens. You know, RBA should be able to do more of citizen-centered coverage. Yeah.
I totally agree.
I think
James?
I want to differ a little bit
with
Bana on the last point of subsidies.
Yes.
But before I come to that, I think it's important to contextualize. You need to look at the situation of our media in Rwanda again. Now, of course, you know the internet, the digital disruptions came at a point when the media in Rwanda was actually staggered. It was not even close to being on equal footing with media's, organizations in the region. Because of our history, because of our unique context, because of the challenges of reading culture, because of issues of, like, for instance, the New Times, if you're going to use English, people are still picking up English. It is now that we are starting to get young, vibrant youth that can express themselves in English and write in English and, conduct interviews in English. Now, while we are still figuring out and trying to find our footing in that space, with those peculiar challenges of our own here, then came the internet challenges. Now that one, even made the situation worse. Now, if very established, reputable media organizations anywhere in the world have been affected, now you can imagine how much
it is in our case.
In our case in Rwanda. Of course, the Washington Post had to be bought by Jeff Bezos, I think 2013 or so, thereabouts, because they were already having challenges related to what we're talking about today. This is probably 6 years later, but even closer to home, Nation Media, that is owned partly, I think, close to 50% by the very rich family at the Aga Khan, that have pumped in money consistently, and they're doing just fine. I think there is a recent ranking that ranked Nation Media to be #1, most read or most influential, whatever, online publication in Africa.
Not East Africa, but Africa.
In Africa. Okay. In Africa. So you can, it's huge, it's massive. Been halved by these challenges we're talking about. They're also struggling and trying to realign and adjusting and making changes, even with this big funder that to EGH, come to the New Times, come to any publications in Rwanda, it is even worse. Now, elsewhere, there has been different models, different ways of getting out of this challenge. One is to close down.
To shut down.
Yeah, you shut down, close shop as a media house. It's an option. It has happened. Yes,
It's
you
the
can
last
switch.
option.
Like it's an option though. So many
Yes.
previous well-established media organizations have actually
Yes.
closed shop. Number two, no one is saying we want to have a Rwandan media closed shop because of this issue of technology, internet technology. Number two, it is to be bought. Somebody will come in, pump with money, like what happened with the Washington Post. Number three, philanthropists will come and pour in money and say, okay, because one, news is a public good. Now, actually, I don't agree with Ban as well that, it is only public broadcasters that deserve support from government or subsidies, because whether it is public or private, you're providing public good. So in the end, it is the ultimate beneficiary is the citizen. This is the ultimate final consumer, it's the citizen. And this has, other implications on the country, on the country's aspirations, empowering citizens, educating citizens. So on the point of subsidies, which is another issue that people can look into, media also plays a very important educative role. So what happens, and I think some countries do that, you subsidize on some of the materials, like for say newsprint, for instance. Newsprint. If you use a printer, you use a newspaper, you subsidize, you remove taxes, you waive taxes on newsprint. Of course, governments they are taxed actually. At the moment, of course, governments.
Is New Times taxed?
No, I mean not. They don't tax the newspaper, but the materials, the raw material, the consumables, the products that are imported, the newsprint is taxed.
It's taxed.
It is taxed, and that has an implication. So what people, I think, when you mention the subsidies, these are some of the things that people look at, to remove and say, okay, newspapers, we can say, they play an educative role in society. They're important. They're stakeholders in this effort. Okay, we can waive this specifically for newspapers. But also governments can put in the funding. The Chinese do it. Yeah, and I don't think.
Still shaking her head.
No. You see, it's about people's choices.
Yes.
Yeah, the Chinese do it. I'm not saying it's the best model,
but it's done.
But Xinhua is thriving. Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah. So,
but just
I understand her concerns.
Yes.
Oh yes, obviously. Yes. But if you describe news as a public good,
it is a public good.
Yeah, then it cannot be only about for the media. And this thing of charging stories because you covered the stories, and it also allows the corporate world or your sources to dictate the content. It comes back to the issue of quality as well.
But Brenda made a very key point. She said, look, if it's not newsworthy, and there are different parameters every news house has in terms of making news or
it
stories
shouldn't be covered as news.
So if it's not newsworthy, then please don't expect us to come.
It shouldn't be
even
covered
though there's
as
a
news.
public official.
Yeah, but who are you blaming?
That's what's happening right now.
Who are you blaming?
The system.
No, there's nothing like system.
I want to hear from.
There's nothing like system.
Yes.
Newsrooms take decisions.
Yes.
So somebody will invite you. It is up to you to go and cover or not.
When I said the system in Rwanda, if there's a Muyobozi there, there's a public official, unfortunately, because there's some things you see that are not newsworthy. Why is this workshop taking over 2 minutes of primetime news at 9 p.m.? What is newsworthy about it?
But you cannot blame the Muyobozi for inviting the media.
No, but I'm saying it's the system.
You can blame the media for giving that much airtime to the Muyobozi.
But they did that because of the system, the context at which we live in. And you talked about context.
Let me clarify.
Yes.
Let me clarify. Yes. What actually happens? Yes. And as he was speaking, I was thinking of theory from practice, as a position paper that someone could write, from theory to practice. The thing is, the more, and I know this from experience, the more you don't cover some of these events, you're blacklisted. They say, we invite you to our events, you don't even show up.
This is the real context we're living in, James.
And this is the reality.
If I were the PR,
and so,
if I were the PR of that organization, yes, I would blacklist you.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
So if we go back to the issue of we want to cover a story for the sake of its newsworthiness.
Yes.
If the judgment in the newsroom is that there's no news here, I don't expect to be asked the question, why didn't you send a reporter? Because already you have PR departments that are in the business of public relations.
Yeah, but you can politely say, because I did find the
It doesn't
enemies,
work like that. What does EGH do about this? But before you get to that,
Yes.
where do you think this money should come from?
All right. So I will go against some of the views that were shared here.
Yes.
So I do not agree with government subsidiaries.
Okay.
Why? Because I feel that media houses should be creative.
And you're the creative director at EGH, so, you know.
Yes, so I feel that we should find creative ways in getting financing. So as she said, as Berna said, we can get we can put out the policies that regulates the events that we can go to, but also maybe as I will continue to ask later, but I think that it's the way we package or we actually package our products and services. So I feel that if we package our product in a way that is actually appealing even to a person who would be interested in maybe paid content, I feel that can actually bring some financing as we wish. Now, the other thing is if we have that financing from more people, I feel that.
But from which people?
So I think
I want you to narrow down
those people.
When we get financing, where does it come from?
Here's a question.
How does EGH or New Times or
a communication budget, right? So maybe what we need to do is more of a package journalism or even the content we're actually putting out there in a way that can actually give us some of that communication budget that they've put aside. Yes, so that's what we've been trying to do. It's not easy, it's tough, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to package our services in a way that appeals to our prospective clientele. And so far, I think that they just need the marketing people to go and meet them and try to explain to them why publishing their content online and paying for that content is important or is actually necessary. So it's in the way you actually position yourself and also shape or actually bring out your products and services.
So is EGH struggling right now when it comes to looking for money to stay afloat in this digital age?
All right.
Or are you good?
I wouldn't say that. That would be a little bit overconfident.
Yeah.
But I would say that we are trying, and we believe there is room for improvement. So it's not easy, but we're always trying to find diverse ways to get financing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to quickly ask something in terms of financing as well. You've stated your case, James. Brenna, you've stated your case. Very interesting points as well, including you, Olga.
Actually, to set the record straight.
Yes.
You see, what I meant by the government getting involved, or I did not exonerate the medias. The media have their own role to play. Internally, each media organization, they should be able to be more dynamic. They should be able to transition from, in our case, from print to digital.
Yes.
They should be able to. We have had a challenge for a long time of skills. At the New Times, at the moment, we are trying to actually initiated a fellowship of sorts.
Oh, nice.
For 3 months, for young people from journalism schools, even from other backgrounds. We've just completed the first cohort, has just graduated.
Oh, nice.
And we're seeing some impact.
Yes.
So media organizations, I believe, each one of them are doing certain things internally, embracing what the young people want, finding the young people where they are, diversifying our platforms. If they are on Instagram, how do you find them there?
James, that
what kind
all
of
costs
content,
money.
It all costs money.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
No, I want to
It
bring
all
back,
costs money, but what I wanted to make clear,
the onus is also on media houses to
is
stay
to say
dynamic.
that also
Yes.
media houses have a role,
absolutely.
but that does not mean that other partners are not needed.
They're not needed.
Yeah.
So speaking of partners, this is kind of a controversial question, but in this, like we're talking about, financing is an issue. But a lot of donor money that's coming into the continent, I'm sure you're aware of this, is increasingly oriented towards media. You have China, focusing on media houses, or in media, whether it's health reporting or construction reporting on different African countries. You have, for instance, a lot of investments by, international bodies, like BBC's investment in Africa, for instance, in terms of the media is great. It's big, it's huge. But I want to go back in terms of donor journalism. I don't know if that's the correct phrase, but in terms of financing, we've identified the gap. What is your stance on financing that comes in terms of foreign aid, which is on the increase, it's on the rise? So if China or, Turkey or, I don't know, Sweden or Norway or these, Western European countries comes through and say, New Times, we're here to give you a budget for 5 years, this, as Africans, also as well as making sure we, maintain a Pan-African spirit in our media. Where do we sit? Like, how do we navigate the issue of financing and then receiving finance from foreign aid? Do we accept it? Do we not? Do we?
There's a challenge. There's a caveat, because if somebody is paying you, they have their own interests.
Of course.
If they're financing you, they're not doing it for nothing.
For the greater good.
No. Because
not, yes.
if China is coming in big time, and they are doing that, if anybody is trying to come and say, okay, have the money, do ABCD, yes. I don't think they're doing it because they love Africa per se, or they love the New Times or AG or anyone, yes. But they probably are pursuing a certain agenda.
Of course. And
they find you as a potential strategic partner to convey, to relay some of their interests or information. Obviously, every media house would have their own ways of dealing with these situations, the experiences, but I think it comes at a great risk, because we want to view ourselves, like in the context of us in Rwanda, want to look at ourselves and view ourselves as partners in telling the Rwandan story, and in helping, supporting good causes and promoting things that make our country better, educating our people, partaking that effort. Now, there is no foreigner who is going to come genuinely, really interested in just promoting what you want to promote, your own interest, your country's interest, and they have no interest of their own.
So we shouldn't take this donor money.
It's not a black and white. It's not a black and white situation.
Yes.
Because obviously the media, we do get training sometimes from these people. We call them partners. Sometimes we will probably receive equipment that we need, but you cannot make them your primary source.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Bernard?
I agree with him. There's no free lunch, so I think that let's first set that record straight. There's no free lunch. But I always feel that for some reason, and I don't know why, generally in Africa, we don't really appreciate the role of the media. Because if we did, then we would make the right investments. But as it is today, you'll find that most of the funding that is made available, it's actually to fund African media, not any other. I mean, few initiatives are there to fund media in the Western world, for instance. For some reason, most of the money that comes from abroad is targeting African media.
Why is that?
Exactly, that's the question.
We really need to wake up to this. Why is that?
Yeah, we need
and this is why we'll keep on playing second fiddle in telling our stories.
And there is a gap.
There's a gap.
Why don't our African governments see this? Why are we
Bernard
waiting
doesn't
for,
feel like
for
it's
BBC
the right
to
approach.
come and invest in
Bernard
us?
doesn't think African governments should pour in money in this sector.
No, it is
but
different.
I think,
no,
I know,
let me explain. The thing is, there's a way that African governments can support media.
Yes.
That does not necessarily mean giving subsidies. I'll give you an example.
I really liked the whole inserting media in the whole MICE strategy that we have.
Yes.
In terms of conferencing. But go ahead. Yes.
For instance, the environment. If you improve the environment for local journalists across Africa, already you're allowing them to produce better content that can be sold
I want you to kind of call a spade, Berna. When you say environment, what do you mean? What do you mean a conducive environment for journalists?
I mean, as journalists, we don't sell ice cream, so we are always, poking our noses into other people's business. We're expected to write about inconvenient truths. Ask uncomfortable questions, and we need an environment that allows that.
Okay. Yes.
Secondly, I feel that if we use the current status where we are as an example, before, there used to be a bigger communication budget. Over time, for some reason, I don't know, the folks at the Ministry of Finance, every time there's need to cut a budget, the comms budget is always the one that's, and it becomes difficult. So we are not saying in, and that leaves room and a gap for us to look for funding elsewhere. And what we're increasingly seeing is that there's a trend in philanthropy around media in Africa, funding initiatives that rich people are interested in. You have illicit finance, for instance. There's a lot of funding around health, malaria, So in the end, we are forced to just focus on where we think the money is. And that's an issue. So I think that has to change.
That has to change.
Yeah.
Olga, what are your thoughts on this before we move to the next part of the question, where I want us to just briefly discuss the disruption that is digital media?
All right. So on financial aid, I think that, it does not come free, of course. It does not just come haphazardly or by happenstance. So I think that mainly, what we need to see is sit down and look at that funding. Is it going to stop our objectivity, or is it going to influence our impartiality or the content we're actually putting out there? And if yes, then definitely I don't think that that funding would for instance, be of help either to the media house or to the media sector in general. So in very short words, I think that it's all to see if that funding is rather helping or actually destroying little by little even the fairness or even the values or the ethical journalism of the media house.
Yes. Very quickly, before we go to our Twitter social media feed, I want us to just quickly talk about the disruption of digital media and what your media houses are doing to address this. Like I said early on when the show began, we're living in an age where there's a clickbait syndrome. You click on a story thinking you're going to get real good news, and it's absolute nonsense. Or journalists are quick to break a story, even though they don't have facts, just to be the first to come up with this news. And it erodes on, the factuality as part of journalism. Ideas generally, as representatives of media houses, on the disruption of traditional media, by digital media, in that kind of waters down the quality of journalism. And Bren, I'll start with you.
At Nation Media Group, we've actually had to sort of go back to the drawing board. And like he alluded to, we've suffered. If you look at, we are publicly listed, so our financials are out there for everybody to see. Yes. Our profit has been going down. It's, so that's forced us internally to start rethinking, because, you cut costs to a level where you can't cut anymore.
Yes.
And so now what you have to think about, what products, for instance, can you bring on the market? But one thing is key. We have to stick to the basics of journalism.
Yeah.
Because with digital disruptions, what we're seeing is there's a lot of misinformation, and the so-called, bloggers who many people feel that are filling the gap for journalists. With time, it's becoming clear that, if you're paid to tweet, it's very different from, journalism. So for us...
I wish we had time to talk about journalists versus bloggers, by the way.
Yes.
Very touchy subject in Rwanda. But go ahead.
Yeah, so for us, we are going back to the basics. we need to get our journalism better, first of all, better, stick to the facts, and we are not rushing to break the news unless we have done our homework.
So fact-checking, top on the list.
Fact-checking, investigative journalism. Just this week in Kenya, you may have seen we had a big, our colleagues at NTV Kenya had this big investigation around maize and the aflatoxins, you know. So we are going back to the basics. But at the same time, on the digital platforms, we have been forced to reinvest. As we speak this week, NMG is trying to overhaul its digital platforms to cater for, you know, the different needs. Because the thing about the digital space is it's changing. So you're grappling with understanding and responding to this 24-hour clock, you know, news production. Yeah, but again, it's sticking back, going back to the basics, the core principles of journalism, and trying as much as you can to be innovative. Before, Nation Media Group was not in the business of events. Today we have an events business. This is how quality ideas come through. We have a forum called Nation Media Leadership Forum, so we are doing several of these events. We also have a music label that not many people know about. It's called Leads. So, I mean, yes,
you're really
have to diversify.
You're still ahead of the game.
Revenue.
So in addition to what Bernal just mentioned, I would also add that in our case, we also try to adapt to the changing terrain, changing tastes and preferences of our readers. Most of our readers' numbers are showing us that they are between 25 and 40% of our readership. That 25 to 35 years, that's the demographic area. So we kind of trying to figure out, in some cases we know, but I think we should try to be as specific as possible. Even with these numbers, somebody who is 40 years old maybe is not interested in the same thing as the one who is 18 years old. And yet you need mass. So for online, you need mass. Previously, it was more to do with individual reader. But now with the digital, you basically need numbers. Because numbers matter at the end of the day. You can sell numbers.
You can sell numbers.
So we're trying to come up with different platforms. Packaging is very important, like Olga alluded to. And then readers at different platforms. You have to find them there. So if you're going to be in your comfort zone, it will probably, this is not the best time to do journalism. So it's really challenging, but it's also at the same time exciting, because also digital technologies also have their own opportunities. Now the space that the likes of YouTubers are trying to occupy, it's an area that we should try to occupy ourselves. But then there is always, you need quality, you need to invest, you need to do the right thing. You don't want to be there first necessarily because you want to break the story, but I mean, you want to think that you have a level of public trust. So
and this is an issue in Rwanda. You know, just to reiterate what you're saying, it's an issue in Rwanda because you have a lot of YouTube television, by the way. I won't say the names, but there are lots of YouTube television stations, well, television channels, and the content is really, it's questionable. I mean,
they're very popular.
They're very popular, but some of them actually have been taken to book by authorities because of, you know, irresponsible content. So it's really tough. It's a thin line between trying to stay afloat and relevant, but at the same time adhering, like Joanna said, to just basic tenets of journalism. Very quickly, what is your take on how we can really stay,
online. So I would start by saying that flexibility is a must. So keeping up with trends, it's something that journalists should actually have in mind. So as an example, for instance, I will just start 10 years ago, Igihe started. So it was in a time when say 80% of media was print, And
you really stayed ahead of the curve. I think you came into the market and said, we're not going to do what, for instance, New Times is doing, a print, we're going to try and keep it online.
Yes.
But how's that working for you so far?
So it's working pretty well, because we with us trying to keep up with trends, it's stay ahead of the curve. As for example, we tried having various services that would accompany the content we're actually publishing. For instance, audiovisual content with the YouTube channel, as we were saying just earlier. And as years passed on, we actually decided to actually change or actually restructure. Like, for example, our audiovisual services, where the business unit now came to be actually a company, which is Storycast, and the IT services we actually gave out, we were actually selling are now it's now a company, which is
so all these are subsidiaries of EDH.
Exactly.
Great.
So yes, we're trying to actually diversify and make sure that in all sectors, in all the services we're actually like giving out, we actually manage to stay ahead, that we are always first.
And this, at the same time while doing this, you make sure that you stick to the
ethical journalism.
yes, ethical journalism.
Yes.
I want us to go to our Twitter feed very quickly. We have some tweets that we'd like to read out, time allowing. And the first tweet is from Jesse. Jesse says, digital era didn't disrupt any media in Rwanda because media almost didn't exist. James, the question is for you. Is that your true assertion? On the other hand, the challenges of a media space are inherent in deep cultural and societal myths. We are yet to customize the Rwanda media. James, over to you. Over to you and Bernard before we close.
I would say we are disrupted just like anyone else, yes. But maybe the impact has been harder hitting, if you like, on our side because of the historical challenges we had. We hadn't really stood on our feet yet, and then all this whole thing came and swept us off the ground. So, yes, there were challenges, very serious challenges, and then this disruption for us did not come at the best time, if you like. But you have to, again, live with it and try to, circumvent, go around it, and still be relevant.
Brenna, very quickly, what's your, before we close down the show, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that tweet.
I think that the Rwandan media has an opportunity, because if you don't have the legacy of making huge investments in print, like we are struggling with at Nation Media Group, if you have non-print. And the more reason companies like EJ may succeed is because you can just start. You can just start. You don't need a lot of capital. You simply need to be creative, and perhaps more importantly, have the space to sort of do these things, try them out, tease them out. Yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of the show. Unfortunately, time runs so quickly when you're discussing these pressing issues. I'd like to thank you for joining the show. Olga, thank you for honoring our invitation. James, pleasure to have you on behalf of the New Times. And Brenna, not only as a Square Resident panelist, but on behalf of Nation Media Group, thank you for joining us. And all the best with the Kusi event next month.
Thank you so much.
To our viewers, thank you for tuning in. I'd like to thank our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee. Please keep the conversation going using the Square hashtag the Square RW that you see on your screens. Thank you for tuning in, and see you again next week. Have a good night.